Welcome to the program. I'm Darin Slyman, and you are on the edge. Today's guest is Legrand Wolf, founder and CEO of Carnal Media. A pioneer in the adult entertainment industry, Legrand is known for pushing creative boundaries with his innovative content. From launching groundbreaking sites like Mormon Boys to building award-winning networks of over 30 outlets in the digital sphere, he continues to lead with vision and inclusivity. Please welcome to the program, Legrand Wolf. Hello, sir.
Hello.
How are you today?
Doing fantastic.
Awesome.
I'm enjoying a little bit of rain in Prague at the moment.
Oh, yes, that's right. You are in Europe right now. Aren't you supposed to do like a tour or a cruise or something?
No. Right now I'm here for the TES conference. It's more technical, but it's an adult industry conference that focuses on what the majority of adult is, which is a tech-based world.
Yes, it is. And actually, what a great segue. Thank you so much for providing that. I've been around for a bit. Full disclosure, 50 years of age. I have seen the evolution of the adult industry from all the way back to you have to go to a theater and sit in a theater to watch adult, then pivoting to beta and VHS tapes, to DVD, to streaming, and wherever we go in the future. But that brings me to the fact that, your journey began. What year was it? I want to say it was like 2004 with Mormon Boys. Was it something like that?
So in 2000, we first started kind of working on the concept much earlier than we launched. We launched in 2010. So in 2010, we launched Mormon Boys. It was a sort of a like early stage. We didn't really know exactly what we were doing, just kind of trying something out.
Yeah, prior to that, were you in the industry, and what was your journey and your path from pre to post developing your own corporation?
So before I got into the adult industry space, I was very Mormon. I grew up Mormon. I served a Mormon mission in Ukraine, in the Ukraine Donetsk mission. I held leadership positions. I was really very about as invested as you can get. Probably something to do with the fact that I was gay and had something to try and prove. Was hoping, based on the religious indoctrination, that God would fix me. The more religious I was, the more devout I was, the more likely I would be to be fixed. And no longer be gay, right? Came home from my Mormon mission, went to BYU, got a great education at BYU. It's a great school. It is a religious school in the sense that BYU is owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. But I got a very secular education there. I focused on science. Molecular biology microbiology was my focus. And, I really loved my science-based classes, and I ended up getting after my freshman year an internship that turned into employment with a microbiologist, and did research, and it helped me get a scholarship, helped pay for school. It was great, but I did research at the university, at BYU, Brigham Young University, and then when I was nearing the end of my time there, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, one of my best friends from my Mormon mission had got into my head that based on my paramedic past, which I did when I was in high school, and my interest in medicine, the right way to go would be to become a doctor, right? And this is a really laudable profession. So I poured my energy into getting ready for, and then ultimately sort of applying for medical school. And of the places I got in, I chose the University of Utah because at the time I hadn't come out yet, and I thought if I'm going to get married to a Mormon woman, I better have that taken care of, and right now is sort of the time to do it before I go, into the rest of the world. That was the decision. That was the reason I went to the University of Utah. And actually, University of Utah is a brilliant school. It's not a religious school; it's a state school. Lower campus undergrad is very liberal, but as with all medical schools, the University of Utah Medical School is quite conservative, and there were a lot of Mormons in the medical school. So it wasn't exactly the easiest thing when, after my freshman year, my medical school freshman year, I came out of the closet. I took a leave for a year to try and sort things out, and it was pretty tumultuous period. I mean, I was sort of finally acknowledging and coming to grips with, this is who I am, learning to really, love myself. I met my husband at that time. I started up a group that, where he and I met initially as sort of, participants in a group that I had created. It was a lecture series group where I would invite in lecturers to talk about, the history and the science of homosexuality, absent anything religious. And and then when the time came to go back to medical school, I tried it out, but it no longer felt like I didn't. My passion for what I'd been striving for previously was to sort of get myself into a profession to kind of prove something, and and the passion was gone. I mean, I didn't love it. I didn't love the way in which I felt when I was I did well, but I didn't love it. And I really wanted to do something that I loved. And I remember talking to my dad at the time, who had always wanted me to be a doctor anyway. So this was going to be a bummer for him. And I already disappointed him by coming out. Actually, when I came out to my father, he was lovely and told me that, he hoped that he had never said anything to hurt my feelings. He immediately said, I think the Mormon church has got this wrong, and immediately became a gay rights activist. So my dad was fine. But my thinking was, this is going to be rough. Not for me, because I want to go into business, but my dad really wants me to be a doctor. And sure enough, my dad was like, doctors are businessmen, right? And I was like, not exactly the business I want to do, though, right? So I started a company, and then that kind of morphed into another company, in that there was the global economic crisis, the GC, happened. Economies tanked. The economy tanked here, but also over the world, and so. In 2007, I had to sort of rethink what I was doing. In 2008, I took the technology we had developed and rolled it into essentially like a consulting business that I ran for about a year. I proposed to my husband. Gay marriage had just become legal in California. We were going to move to California. I was super excited. And then Prop 8 happened. And the Mormon church got very heavily involved, denied it. Later came to light that they were involved, very heavily involved. Also, I had friends at BYU who were being told that it was a requirement. They were told in church it was a requirement to go into these call centers, where they then, as students, had to take their student time to go into call centers and make phone calls to California residents to persuade them that this was a bad idea. And of course, all of the messaging had been workshopped by very highly trained, highly skilled PR people. And they were effective. They were effective in sending people door to door in California. They were effective in their phone campaigns. And indeed, Prop 8 passed. And gay marriage was revoked. My husband and I decided to get married in Boston, where it was legal. Actually, not in Boston, in Massachusetts. We got married actually on Plum Island. But we flew to Boston. And my oldest sister, a lovely human being, she married us. My immediate family was there. My husband, his brother showed up, and his brother's girlfriend at the time. And they were the ones that came, had a lovely ceremony, and then on our honeymoon, we were sort of talking about what we want to do next. We came to the conclusion that porn would be the right way to go. Didn't really know anything about it. Hadn't done much camera work, if any. Yeah, and so we put up some ads on Craigslist and did a bunch of research online about starting an adult business, and armed with that knowledge, I took my coding skills and built us a website because there was no kind of OnlyFans. There was no platform where you could go pre-built. You had to sort of build your own. So I built my own. I got my own biller, relationship lined up. I, figured out the software that manages members, and kind of go through and do this whole design process. And then, yeah, we launched what's now Masonic Boys 1.0. Back then, we obviously had a different name, but yeah, it was sort of a wild journey. And then a few months later, my husband and I were working for ourselves, obviously. A few months later, while I was in Minnesota, one of the people who had been a mentor for me in medical school, he reached out to me and he said, and he's a famous sex researcher at the University of Minnesota. He was in the School of Public Health at the time, and he said, hey, it would be really lovely to meet up. I know that you're no longer, pursuing the medical thing. And I was like, actually, I'm in Minneapolis, where you are right now. I was actually filming content for the site we were going to launch. So we met up, and he asked me, hey, have you heard of this person? And it was my stage name. He's like, we're really interested in running a grant that looks at SEM, sexually explicit media. And we want to look at the intersection of MSM, men who have sex with men, and technology, and how this, what happens at this intersection and why it's causing certain shifts in behavior, and maybe there's risk factors that we haven't been considering in terms of HIV spread, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this sort of this kind of grand idea, and it fit very nicely with the parts of I guess my sort of medical training that I liked, and also kind of the science and math that I also liked. And my job would essentially be to be the project coordinator, because he offered me the job. Yeah, I said, actually, that person who started that site that you're talking about, the Masonic Boys 1.0, that's me. So that's weird. And he's like, whoa, would you like to have this job? And I said, yeah. And that, he was offering a job that came with health insurance and came with, stability. And the University of Minnesota would stand behind me and my new company, that I was creating, this porn company. I would get, good advice. I would get support. And they were excited for me to pursue, the online membership site, while simultaneously being a project coordinator, which I did for 5 years, on grants. And that was a really important time in my life. I got to work firsthand with researchers who take sex and kind of the adult industry not just seriously, but they really understand the importance of how this technology and how gay porn is impacting not just gay men, but it's impacting the world in positive ways. And it was lovely. I mean, it was. I went to Sex Tech and gave presentations to people about the research we were doing, and I don't know, had a great time. So at the end of that, armed with all of the knowledge, because of course I was asking men and they weren't gay identifying men, just men who watch porn. I was asking them why they click and buy the type of porn that they do, especially in an environment where so much stolen content is freely available, where there's rampant theft and people consume predominantly stolen material on tube sites, and on social media platforms. How do you actually survive? And I was asking these men, why would you pay for a subscription? What sites do you actually subscribe to? Why do you subscribe to them? What is your favorite genre? Why do you like this? And I mean, among many, many, many other questions, these surveys were massive that I was conducting. And I learned so much about the marketplace, and I learned so much about gay men. And I got to work with some of the top researchers in the world to interpret this data and to kind of really understand it and take it in. So 5 years later, I had a lot better understanding of what I needed to do. So Masonic Boys 1.0 got a real sort of bump because of that knowledge. And over the course of the next 3-4 years, it became somewhat of a sensation, despite the fact that a lot of people didn't super love it. They're like, what is Mormon porn? That's not a thing. And I was like, it's not Mormon porn. It's intergenerational And the Mormonism is sort of a facade that we use to say, if you're a 25-year-old and you just want nothing more in the world than to, please your ecclesiastical leaders, you're willing to do anything. And that was a lived experience for me. But this was, in my mind, the right place to explore that fantasy. Because it should just be a fantasy, just like I believe churches should be museums. I don't believe churches should. I believe that, a lot of these things that we see, they're perfectly great as, like Tolkien-esque fantasy, but they shouldn't be reality. And so, what I really understood was this is an opportunity for me to lean into, what we are, what we've created, the fantasy element of it, and give people a really healthy outlet. And again, armed with all of this knowledge, sex research and sex researchers who had, been my mentors and been helping me, I feel like we created something really special. So that was my journey into it, and then sort of how I developed my company was learning along the way. I mean, during the Mitt Romney run, we also launched Mormon Secret, which was a Magic Mormon underwear, store, and we were the only place that was selling it. Orange is the New Black reached out and asked to buy, because you can't get Magic Mormon underwear, but I was manufacturing them in China, and had them in a pick and pack service in Michigan, and I had opened up a Shopify store I did all of like the Victoria's Secret parody stuff, but it was Mormon Secret, and I had Ann and Mitt Romney in their Magic Mormon underwear, and I was genuinely terrified that Mitt might win, but it was a Mormon moment. Book of Mormon the musical just hit Broadway. Mormons had not only passed Prop 8, but now we're getting a lot of attention for their involvement. And so people were talking about Mormons in a big, big way. And with Mitt Romney running, it was sort of like someone wearing Magic Mormon underwear could sit on the literal throne of power in the world today, right? Like that seems scary to me. That if you believe in these fantastical things that in some cases are pretty harmful, you could be the leader of the free world. And frankly, I mean, any religious belief, I feel the same way. But, this was like very close to home. And I, really leaned into the idea that, look, as a fantasy, it's great. There is fiction for a reason, all kinds of fiction. Some people want to read about, some type of serial killer fiction and, mystery fiction. They want to read about, other fantastical worlds. But if you're going to have an ecclesiastical leader exert their authority to get, young men to do something, especially given that 2x2 Mormon missionaries who everyone sees goes out to doors, this is already sort of in the gay psyche in my mind, kind of like firemen and, I don't know, a lot of the other, tropes. I saw it as a way to say, look, you can enjoy that fantasy because it should be a fantasy. This should not exist in reality.
Well, that's interesting because, your brand has been built on kind of taboo scenarios, correctly? The younger, older generation, the justification, or not justification, the intersection of that type of aspect, liturgical, the fantasy base. But, listening to this story really made real sense. One of your characters is Dr. Wolf, and you took the approach of like ultrasound. So now that all makes sense where that came from your medical background and your research with the group out of for sex and technology intersection, which is awesome. I love how you explain the concept of fantasy, because that was one of the questions I had is, as a middle-aged gay man, my tastes have changed and altered in, what I find to be sexy and cool. Totally different from when I was 20 to now when I'm 50. Some things I'm kind of like, what is that? And then the other time I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you and your publicist, was because I was like, what is this fantasy aspect, and where, how are we putting it out there to the world that this is illusion, but it's not scary, right? But it's also not fact. So how can you put that out there with that kind of push that, is pure fantasy driven?
Sure. So let's start with the idea that we all hopefully subscribe to, that fiction is something that, you know, critical thinking adults can understand and distinguish as fiction, separate and apart from reality, right? And so operating from like that assumption obviously means those people who are not capable of distinguishing these things, I've already lost them, unfortunately. Okay. So, but fantasy, and bringing fantasy to the world in sort of a way that allows people to explore ideas and kind of think about things is really important. So I'll give you an example of this. When I came out, I was 25, and so a long time ago, VHS was kind of going, it was on the way out. DVD was very much on the way in. But I did laser discs in like high school. Like, the whole journey that you're talking about, I was sort of aware of the theaters. I went and I visited, friends and family in New York, and then would sneak into like the Peep Town area. And like there were these theaters, but I wasn't old enough to go into them, but I certainly wanted to. Like that whole thing, right? So quite a while ago, for me, I came out in an environment where, as a young man, it was 100% expected of me that I would date someone else who's like exactly my same age. And one of my very first boyfriends was about 10 years older than me. He had been in the military. My second boyfriend, just a few months later, was actually the grandson or like the grandnephew of the prophet of the Mormon Church. But so I was 25, he was 45. And I thought he was sexy. And I'd had hookups, I'd had sex with people who are my same age. When I had sex with him, I was like, oh, this is the thing. You actually understand sex. You understand my body. You understand. And this is how, and he was a good kisser. And most of the guys my age like sucked at kissing. Like they approach you with their tongue out first. And I don't know. It's just like, he across the board was in my mind a really lovely human being, a great lover, and someone who I really enjoyed spending time with. I thought he was an incredibly sweet human being. He was generous, and he was compassionate, had a lot of empathy, and he had lived in San Francisco, and he had lived through the HIV/AIDS crisis and lost a lot of people. And this was an opportunity for me to learn because I had not lived through it. And I would bring this boyfriend to different events, and people were just disgusted. And they would say pretty nasty things like, can't you get someone your own age? And I don't know. I'm like, I thought I was fairly attractive. I didn't think I was anything, super special, but I didn't think I was, it's like, sure. I could, but this is who I choose. And why, like, aren't we fighting for the freedom to be with the people that we choose? Like, I choose him. I'm 25. I can make that decision. I find him sexy. And I think it's kind of insulting that you would, have an opinion about, like, especially as a gay person, how hypocritical. And by the way, it became very apparent to me later in life just how not a problem that would be if I had been like a straight girl and the man that I was dating was 45. But like being a gay guy, that caused a lot of internalized homophobia to rear its head among people who were my peers. And I don't know, it was disappointing. Eventually, I met my husband. He's 4 or 5 years younger than me, and so then I was basically considered a cradle robber. People were disgusted with me then because, you should really date someone who's exactly your same age. And I was like, why? Like, I love Jay very much, and he's just a beautiful human being, and I've fallen in love with him, and I think I want to spend my life with him. Why would that be a problem? Yeah, and bottom line is, I understood in that moment that gay people sit in sort of a unique position. So backing up to kind of explain how this all ties into fantasy. Gay people have been told a lot of really horrific messages about themselves growing up, right? they've been told that homosexuality is the same as bestiality. It's the same as pedophilia. It's the same as rape. It's the only thing worse is murder, right? Homosexuality is like, your striations of like horrible and evil. In fact, some people, think that gay people it's worse than murder, right? There's even that sort of like insane, type of messaging out there to young people, which is so damaging. And the result of it is that when gay men come out of the closet, they unfortunately still hang on to all of these sort of messages, and they try and distance themselves from what they perceive the rest of the world as saying that's who you are. And they do so violently, like really aggressively. So, and you see this behavior in people before they come out of the closet, right? The gay kid who's not out of the closet wants to beat up the gay kid more than everyone else, just to show that he's not gay, I promise. Like, I hate him more than everyone else. And it's so sad. And as adults who have come out, there's this real sense that no matter what I see, if it in any way, is different than what I think straight people are going to want to see, a man and a man of basically identical age, getting together and having a white picket fence and a puppy. And, we're a family. We love each other. We want our hospital visitation rights. And a lot of the things that go along with that are a very important thing. It's why I really believed in and fought hard for marriage equality. And I think it was the right decision for our community. But, I also recognized that gay people suffer from, and this huge amount of shame. And that shame.
Well, you bring up a great point, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but this was something I even thought really deeply about when we got marriage equality across the land. And that was why on earth do we have to do our community's marriage the exact same as heteronormative marriage? I'm like, girl, let's do something fun. I don't need to do like the church and the walk down and the this and the.
No, why?
Now, if you want it, great. God bless you. Go
Sure.
do it. But there are other options. And I've always said from day one thing that I've always loved about the queer community in general is we don't have to follow a certain dogma of society. We can and are allowed to have the openness to try different things. I think that's the beautiful part of the community.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
So and I think that would probably translate the same to adult entertainment. You're right. Why do I want to see just somebody who is exactly like me, look exactly like me? That is who I have to date. That is who I have to be with, and try to live up to something over here that is not my or that's a heteronormative, but not my normative, right?
I mean, the other thing that happened for me is I watched people who were into bondage in the straight community have zero shame about being kinksters. Zero shame. They loved it. Men and women would get tied up, and they kind of, it was this sort of erotic thing, and it isn't my thing. It's not for me. But I was just so curious. I loved going to some of these events and talking to people. And also I was exploring my own sexuality. I mean, I didn't know it wasn't for me. But, eventually I realized, no, that's not my scene. It doesn't, do the things for me that it's clearly doing for them. But along the way, I developed a sense of respect for those people who are kinksters. And straight people didn't have any shame. But when it came to the gay people, kinksters probably have the lowest amount of shame, but there was shame there. And there was shame in this, there was some sense that what they were doing was wrong. And I felt a little bit bad, but it really like bored into my head, straight people do not have the same hangups. Like they are not hung up about this. It is really just a gay specific thing. And there's got to be a reason. And so back to the fantasy thing, when I was seeing all of these things happen, I decided that unlike the trend at the time, I don't know about you, but I don't know where you were, but I was in college when like the first reality television shows came out. And I remember them hitting, and I remember people sitting for hours watching the most banal shit you've ever seen on TV and thinking, I don't have the time or interest or patience to watch other people, living out some, like I have my own life. I have my own things to experience. I'm not going to reality television. I never got it, but obviously it hit a nerve because, like, within a few years, it was a huge percentage of our TV programming was reality television, and people were obsessed with it. But what's happened in the last, I would say, 10 years is that the amount of reality television programming has gone way down. And what's back? Fantasy, right? I mean, the biggest shows, the most expensive shows, the most exciting things that you can watch. What, like the Lord of the Rings thing just was more than $1 billion. Anyway, I don't know, some astronomical amount of money. I really shouldn't say a number because I'm not sure exactly what it was. I just remember it was like mind blowing. That's where people have gone back. They've gone back to really enjoying fantasy, and as the mainstream goes, so does porn. So porn went very much into reality. I think Sean Cody did it best, personally, but he also added a little zhuzh of of fantasy. Everyone's straight was sort of the shtick, but a lot of them were straight. And like anyway, and he did it very, very well, and it was fun to watch. But then all of the iterations of reality stuff that came after were sort of lesser and lesser and lesser and like not interesting. And I was pretty excited when OnlyFans came online because I was like, that's where reality porn should live. You get excited about that person. You want to follow that person. It's great. It's like an Etsy shop for the adult industry. Like, fantastic. Open up your little Etsy store. But if I want to subscribe to something, I want to be able to use my imagination and kind of lose myself. And I was watching a lot of Japanese yaoi, Japanese like kind of manga style. I was also reading a lot of manga. And what I saw in the Japanese culture was that they really embraced exploring fantasy, lots of different fantasies. And it was from the most insanely kinky things to some of the most wildly, anyway, just there was a huge breadth of things. And manga is sold in mainstream stores. I mean, the most they do is the censorship is like 2 lines on the penis, and now it's kosher, to be sold in stores. And I was shocked. And of course, several years later now, I think almost 20 years later, if you go and you watch any anime, the amount of sexually explicit content in the anime is bananas. And so I really admired what they were doing, and they were doing it with fantasy. And I wanted to explore those things here in the U.S. Or I'm not in the U.S. right now, but when I am in the U.S., I wanted to explore those things for, for people like me. And when I'd gone through the Mormon temple, the day that my dad, took me for my endowment ceremony. I know it's all the double entendres, but he took me for my endowment ceremony, which happens, and you get a new name, and you get, washed and anointed and clothed in the garment of the holy priesthood, the magic Mormon underwear, called garments, generically. I don't know. Anyway, they are, the temple garment. I walked into the locker room, and my dad said, "Okay, here's this." It was like basically a bed sheet with a hole cut in the top, right? And it was pretty narrow. And I have wider shoulders. I'm sort of a bigger dude. And he said, "You're going to put this on. You take all your clothes off, put them in the locker, lock it, take the key, and then you're going to put this on." So I did what I was told, and I was super excited because this was sort of, this was supposed to be this really special day. And I walked out into a locker room that's like all white, and it kind of doesn't look like a normal locker room. It was, but and there's my dad, and I'm buck naked, except for this, like, what they call a shield to sort of like, whatever. And I'm like, feels really weird. And so my dad took the key, and he said, "You're going to walk to the end, and you're going to go into, the initiatory." And they're, they'll explain. That was it. That's all the information I had. So I walked a very weird walk, mostly realizing that every part of me, was like, as the, little shield thing was flowing around, every part of me was seen by all of the men who were in that locker room, and other young men my age. And I walked into this kind of area that had flowing white curtains, tons of light. All the accents were brass and brass rails. And there was this insanely handsome dude who was probably like, I don't know, 40, 50, I'm not sure. Just super, super handsome, had salt and pepper hair, which just made me weak in the knees. And I was mostly naked, and I was like, this is going to be a problem. This is going to be a real problem. And I don't know what's about to happen. And it only became worse because then, you sit on this little stool. He explains, what's going to happen is I'm going to first wash you. I'm going to kind of take water. I'm going to put it across all, different parts of your body. And as the ceremony goes, you just have to stay there. You don't have to do anything, but I'm going to touch different parts of your body. So we do the washing. And one of the areas is your loins, that you may be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And he didn't touch my dick, but he, right off to the side. And of course, anyway, whatever. I found out later that my suspicions were correct, which is that Joseph Smith actually, like, there was no touching to the side. And since then, they've actually, like, since I went through the temple more than 2 decades ago, they've actually made it so, like, there isn't really this touching at all. Anyway, but at the time, fully naked, except for this skimpy shield thing, and he washed, my body. And then he walked me into this other chamber. There was only one, dude working the initiatory that day. And then he anointed my body, kind of like this ram's horn, and he poured out some consecrated oil and anointed my body, including my loins. But by that time, I was hard, like hard. And, my face must have been like, purple with embarrassment, just, bright red. I could feel it in my ears. And at a certain point, it's so much. But there was nothing that was going to make my dick go down. And so I figured there's nothing to be done. I can't do anything. And he had me, after he went through the ceremony, he held out these Mormon garments and he said, okay, now lift up your feet and I'm going to clothe you in the garments of the holy priesthood. And, step in one leg, step in the other leg hole. He kind of pulls it up and there's my hard dick. And I didn't know it at the time, but I have a bigger penis than, I guess, your average person. And I didn't have a sense that my dick is like bigger. And he had to move my dick to the side in order to get the zipper to go up. And then, my dick sticks straight out. So, there's me, right, full staff towards his face. And then, he zips up the chest. And he smiled at me, this really warm, sort of like knowing smile. And I didn't lose my erection for like 15 minutes thinking about it. I just, I wanted to go somewhere and jerk off. But instead I had to like now hold my dick against my body in weird ways in order to then go through the remaining steps before I was allowed to put on the clothes that then you go through the rest of the endowment wearing, which are all these white clothes. But that experience really stayed with me, especially since later I found out that Joseph Smith had people be fully naked, and then he, did the washing to men and women. I in processing that later, thought, this is really one of many examples of where Mormon leaders put you in a position, your leadership puts you in a position where all you want to do is just, do whatever they tell you. And that's all I wanted. I wanted to show them just how, devoted and, how committed I was. I mean, that's sort of cult mentality. And I would have done anything, that I was asked. And I just thought that should never be. That's not okay. That should be fantasy. And so when it came time to make our first site, the idea of, 19, 20, 21-year-old me, as a Mormon missionary, trying to, just do everything I can to show my devotion and commitment, which is subservience. I wanted to be a sub, essentially, for these very dominant men who were handsome and lovely. And from time to time, you find yourself, with them naked and largely very beautiful human beings, aesthetically speaking. And I thought this is great for fantasy. This is where it should live. but no, it should not. So oh, and by the way, the other thing that people, I want to just finish this one thought. The other thing that people would say was, oh, why are you doing intergenerational stuff? That's so gross. Because at the time, dad son stuff, or like older younger, was a thing of the past. So that had been explored in gay porn in the 70s, no problem. But then there was this huge, after the 80s and, the HIV AIDS crisis, and after, we were fighting for marriage equality, and you want to normalize homosexuality. You want it to be normal by making it as close to heterosexuality as possible. Suddenly we stopped celebrating the sort of what we called in the 70s and 60s dad son stuff. Didn't mean that they were related, it just meant that there's sort of like an age difference. And like on the straight side, calling someone daddy all the time, all day long, no one thinks anything of it. They never went through an HIV/AIDS crisis. They don't have this internalized like freak out where they hate themselves. None of that. They're not trying to prove anything to anyone. And I thought, oh, absolutely. It's not just going to be, two Mormon missionary boys. It's going to be exactly the thing that shouldn't happen in the real world, but absolutely can happen in porn, where you're, subservient to the whims and the will of someone who is older and holds more authority and power. And then every iteration of sites that we've done since then have always played into that contrast. And we like to say that my husband and I say that we do contrast porn. That's the thing that really I think is exciting in a fantasy landscape.
Again, that heteronormative. I'll never forget in probably early 2000s. I was living in St. Louis, and I was getting to know a lot of like corporate leaders, and I'll never forget one of the top people at Anheuser-Busch was like 78 years old, but his girlfriend was 22, and not a peep. No one said anything. No one gave a bat of an eye of one iota.
No, they'll
But
joke
if
about
that
it.
situation was gay, oh, it would have been explosive from a corporate standpoint, from a societal standpoint, from everything.
So what's
The
with the double standard?
hypocrisy is astounding.
Yep, it's hypocrisy. It's a double standard. But understanding the root of it, I think helps you understand the importance of gay porn, which, well, at least it did for me. Right? When I understood that the root of that hypocrisy was rooted in, and if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of deviate from what you were asking about fantasy here for a moment and sort of explain my philosophy, in gay porn and why it's so important. There is only one thing that makes gay people and straight people different, and it is sex. It's not that you're better at art. It's not that you're better at anything. There's nothing biologically speaking that makes a straight man who's 100% heterosexual and a gay man who is 100% homosexual different from each other, except for the attraction leading to sex that you want to have, right? The attraction that you cannot control. It's your taste. It's innate, leading to and kind of giving rise to the sex that you end up having. And if that is the only thing that makes us different, then tell me, if there is bigotry and hatred towards gay people, what is it rooted in? There's only one thing that makes us different. So it must, therefore, be rooted in the sex we have. So until you normalize gay sex, and I'm not talking about normalizing it a heteronormative way. I mean, it's about as interesting to you that I drink red wine as it would be if I drank white wine. And you might drink white wine and think red wine is disgusting. Hate cabs. They're disgusting. I never want to put a cab in my mouth. It's horrible. And I'm like, man, I really love, a really good, white wine. I like the crispness of it. I like the sweetness of it. Here's a list of all of the white wines that I love. And we're not arguing. We might
Right.
jokingly say,
Exactly. I
whatever.
can't stand Chardonnay.
There you go. So in my mind, until we reach the point of making sex, gay sex, about as interesting a distinction for a human, to see, this person uses a different brand of toothpaste. This person likes a different type of wine. This person is a chocolate lover. I am not a chocolate lover. I actually am a chocolate lover. But, like in my mind, like this is a really critical thing. And then you take this one step further. And that is to say that gay porn really undermines so many of the problems. So not just this main problem of bigotry, but it undermines a couple of pretty significant problems that we have both inside of our community and in the world at large. And I describe those in the following way. Has there ever been a time in world history when straight sex has had a blanket prohibition? That there's no way, no universe, nothing, there's never an okay setting for straight sex. There are regulations around straight sex. Religions love to regulate people's sexuality. But on the whole, there has never been a time in human history when straight sex has been banned. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
Correct.
Gay sex, on the other hand, has not shared that history. And when I was born in 1978, the sodomy laws in the United States were struck down. That means, and maybe I'm ancient by some people's standards, fine, that was 2 seconds ago. And the likelihood that we could go back to something like that, in my mind, is so very real. Because there is a strong and vested interest in certain religious individuals in the United States, and broadly speaking in the world, where homosexuality, there is not a majority of countries or places on the earth where homosexuality is accepted. That's not the case. It is a minority. We don't live in a world that has fully embraced us, and there are plenty of places where homosexuality is still criminal today. A lot of places. And people forget that living in our environments. We sort of imagine there will never be a time when gay sex will be criminalized in the United States. And I know, like Handmaid's Tale, sort of for people, they think that's it's too far out there. I don't think it's that far out there. I really don't. Given the opportunity, very religious individuals would absolutely say, "Oh, you're committing homosexuality. You're dead. You get the death penalty."
Well, that's one of the things that surprised me the most about living in Mexico is, Mexico is such a religious, Catholic dominated country, but I actually feel more welcomed here than in the United States. And I grew up in the Midwest, mind you. So Midwest America versus Latin, liturgically based Catholic Mexico, it is a little astounding to me that I actually feel safer, and there seems to be much more openness and liberalness to that in such a religious dogma country.
Well, for the record, you're in Puerto Vallarta, but
Well, that's true, but I don't just stay right here in my little bubble.
I know,
I'm all
I know.
over the country.
But Mexico is a really diverse country, and there are certain places where you probably wouldn't feel safe, regardless of your sexual orientation. And then there are certain places where you'd feel incredibly welcome, and it's lovely. And I really love the time that I've had in my life, the experiences that I've had in Mexico. I love it, and I can absolutely share. I have a similar sense that you do, that exists. But I do want to, sort of emphasize this idea that if we don't lean into gay porn, but instead recoil from fantasy, recoil from these things, we are not moving ourselves forward. We're just not.
Well, and speaking of moving forward, this is
to.
something that is very fascinating to me, is something that you have more recently pivoted to, which is the female to male scenario in the industry. And I mean, full disclosure, honestly, the first time I saw it, I was like, what? Does not compute, does not compute, does not compute. But the more I researched it, the more I kind of was like, well, let me just see. Now it actually all makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but when like 20 years ago, when someone would say they were bisexual, you were like, yeah, right. It's sort of the thing that you say on your way to becoming, like actually fully acknowledging that you're gay. And don't get me wrong, that definitely happens because people don't want to fully, they want to be like, oh, I still like girls though, so I'm bisexual. And there are bisexuals out there, and that was the problem, which is that then people stopped believing that bisexuals were real. And with trans, I remember over and over again, people in my, and I felt like I was in a pretty liberal space. I mean, people don't think Salt Lake City is liberal, but actually Salt Lake City is where everyone goes from all of the very conservative places around. They go there. And I felt like it was really liberal. And I remember interacting with a trans man who was just lovely, and thinking about some of the experiences he explained, that he had. I went to lots of community meetings because, of course, the gay rights movement was really in full force. Marriage equality was, front and center for a lot of people. And actually, in Salt Lake City, there was this really, I thought, brilliant trans activist. She was just great. Anyway, so I had met trans men and trans women, and I started to develop a sense that like there was dialogue that happened within their community that I couldn't necessarily relate to. Things about whether or not it's medical, and you have to be sort of trans, like whether or not it's you should be allowed to express any identity. And of course, 10 years later, people start saying I'm non-binary. That became really the discussion. I thought, oh, that's great. You should be allowed to state, this is what makes me feel comfortable. This is who I am. And of course, gay people are going to support this. And I just didn't see the support in the same way that people didn't believe that there were bisexuals. They sort of didn't believe that people could be, non-binary. And also, there's an awkwardness to the language that needs to be adopted. And so an older generation is just like, if it's they, them, where's the plural? I just see a single person. And I'm like, well, they're, using a language. They're using our language to the best of their ability to describe something that is really who they are. And then 5 years ago, I saw Jock Pussy. And Luke Hudson is so hot. He's just like crazy, crazy, crazy hot. And I realized as I was watching Jock Pussy that this is such an important and such a cool thing that's out there. And I got the opportunity to acquire the network that Jason Sparks was in, and it was a site that Jason Sparks had created. Despite everyone telling him it would never sell and it was a terrible idea, he did it anyway. And Luke Hudson was the star, and then there were other FTM, performers who came after. And so we put our heads together, and I loved it. I said, let's do, you've got Jock Pussy, which is really sort of the jock age group, Twink and Jock. Let's do FTM men. Like Buck Angel, types. So, we really wanted sort of these, like, awesomely, testosterone-filled kind of representations of men, which exist in the FTM community, just like they exist in the gay community and straight community. These are men, and I wanted to celebrate that. And then I realized I actually would like to make a network for this to really be able to promote it. And just like I created Carnal Plus, this would be called, F2M Plus. And it was going to be Jason Sparks content. And so I decided, what I need to do? I want to weigh in. And it'd be really, a great fantasy is the dad-son where the son has a pussy. Because then people who like, this kind of taboo fantasy as jerk-off material that should exist only in fantasy, they'll have the opportunity to really begin normalizing and becoming familiar with the fact that F10 men are men. That you can be a man and have a pussy. And that, to me, was such a delightful thing to... And it's so, like, done correctly. It's erotic, and these people are beautiful. Anyway, I really got excited about it. We launched Transcest and F10 Plus at kind of the same time. Put everything in one network, and it's been brilliant. It's been, it's taken off, and I will say that unlike trans content that appeals to straight people, which is obviously not F to M, but it's M to F, and for M to F, they largely are interested in pre-op individuals, right? So they want to see a dick on a woman. And they're not really hung up about it. You might not be into it, but no one cares. But on the gay side, If you're not into it and you want to say, something about it, you can hear people say, that's disgusting. I think pussies are disgusting. And I'm like, again, I don't care to regulate your thoughts, but the fact that you're putting the effort in to take those thoughts and put them into words that are hurtful, what? Like, you don't have to be attracted to something, but you don't need to then say something that's hurtful. And for a lot of people, you're going to create a certain degree of shame because they might find it hot. And here you are articulating that you think it's disgusting. Like, stop it. If you think it's gross, don't watch it. Just like I would say to straight people, if you're not interested in watching gay porn, why are you watching it?
Well,
Like,
and
so,
truth be told, I've always said a lot of this actually, because I look at the United States and all the rhetoric and craziness and everything, and I go, where did this all come from? And truth be told, a lot of it came from reality television. When you are a mass society watching on your entertainment box, the television, these people doing whatever the hell they want, having no consequences of what they want, that has now become a part of the American psyche. So now anybody is a keyboard warrior and feels as if they can just say whatever they want to whoever they want because there is no consequence to them.
it was a perfect storm, right? Reality television hit at the same time the internet was really, really taking off. And the combination of those two things was and is problematic. And I suppose another profession that I could have gone down would be, to be a researcher and really study, that, because that is very fascinating to me. Again, the intersection of technology with a lot of things, especially the internet with a lot of things, is really, fascinating to me. But it happened. It happened, and this is the world that we live in. And so how are you going to deal with it? And I don't believe in going out and screaming at people and telling them they must think the way that I think. I don't believe that that's going to work ever. I subscribe more to, you're familiar with like the sun and the rain, trying to, have a battle of who can get, someone to take their raincoat off, right? And, the rain comes along and, beats on this person, and tries to blow, get them wet and then trying to blow their raincoat off. So really kind of forcefully take it off from them. And then the sun comes out and just warms everything up and dries off, and they, of their own volition, take off their raincoat, right? And the idea is you want to do things where you're not shouting, yelling at people who you want to do something, demonizing them for whatever reason. Instead, you want to say, look, I believe in something really strongly, and I think it has a force for good. If you want to talk to me, engage with me about it, I will. I'm not going to engage in the hate. But I will engage in a productive conversation about why we do what we do, and the good that we believe it will bring. And that has sort of been our operating philosophy at Carnal Media, but it's also my operating philosophy in life, in general.
Well, this has been such a lovely chat. I really, really appreciate your time today. It's like eye-opening and, gave me a lot of food for thought to think about. And yeah, I look forward to seeing where you go next. What do you have going on next?
A lot. So in the next couple of years, we're launching another network. That will probably happen within the next 6 to 12 months.